Here's to courageous pioneers who understand a legacy is multifaceted. Welcome to our Legacy Planning Podcast, a podcast for leaders and visionaries of all ages. Whether you are an independent entrepreneur or someone who is part of a family business, you too can leave something of value behind for a greater purpose. Perhaps your legacy will improve workplace cultures, seize authentic moments, or inspire others with your talent. Your host, Angelina Carlton, is the founder of Design Your Legacy, a boutique advisory firm based in Beverly Hills, California. She is a mentor and coach to leaders like you and has contributed to Alliance, a philanthropy magazine, as well as to Women in Family Business. She has been recognized by Los Angeles Biz as an LA Woman of Influence, as well as by World HRD Congress for her work. Remember, you deserve great coaching because your legacy is worth completing.
Good morning. My name is Angelina Carlton. I'm the founder of Legacy Planning, a boutique coaching and advisory firm based in Beverly Hills, California. This morning, I have the pleasure of introducing Noah Healy. He is a recreational mathematician and programmer working on upgrading capitalism for this computer age. His tagline is Better Markets for a Wealthier World. He's also developed a superior commodity market design to make production more profitable and economies stronger. So without further ado, welcome, Noah.
Thanks for having me.
I'm looking forward to this conversation. I also understand you're a graduate of the University of Virginia.
Yes. I was the last person admitted to their nuclear engineering department.
So you're a very smart person, and I look forward to diving deep into this. I'm not sure if I should call it an app, but we'll get into that in a moment. So is there anything that you would like to tell the listeners about yourself that might break the ice further? Do you have a favorite movie? Like, is it Trading Places or?
Well, Trading Places is pretty good, but Star Wars. I'm actually a little young for prime Star Wars, but the aunt who was my daycare provider when I was 2, which is when Star Wars was actually released, worked at the local movie theater that Star Wars came out at. As a result, I saw 1 or 2 matinees of Star Wars for essentially its entire initial run while I was learning how to talk. And that resulted in Star Wars being pretty deeply embedded in me.
Yes, and there's some amazing messages in Star Wars, whether it's Yoda or, yeah, these aren't the droids you're looking for.
Yeah, absolutely. Trust your feelings.
Yeah. Very good, very good. So what do you mean by your tagline of better markets for a wealthier world?
Well, marketplaces are an information technology and a trustable news source, and they work to coordinate large scale economies, and they pretty much just happen by accident. Um, the what market prices do is allow individual businesses that are in competition with one another to nevertheless behave as if they're all coordinating with each other. And so we can sort of throw more human brains at a problem and get better solutions that way.
Okay.
The difficulty is that the design of marketplace that we use goes back to the Renaissance, and there's no conception of computers and what they're capable of.
Mhm.
Markets have to deal with the universe, which is, a big, messy place that we don't know very much about. And so there's a lot of noise that's implicit, and markets basically work to cancel that noise out by having people argue about what kind of prices that they're willing to take and publishing what deals actually get made. The difficulty is that the more noise the market's dealing with, the the more it has to charge the user base for the service it's providing. Uh,
Okay.
which which is totally reasonable if the user base can't produce noise.
Okay.
unfortunately, communication speeds and computer speeds mean that it's actually possible to inject noise into the marketplace at a cost that's lower than the benefits that you gain from being part of a marketplace that's dealing with a lot of noise.
Okay.
So
So
this,
yeah.
yeah,
So if I were to intrude for a moment and I were to play devil's advocate and say to you, but the house makes their money off of fees. What say you?
uh, well, exactly. There's no interest if you're using a marketplace that's designed the way marketplaces are designed now to do anything about this problem, because increasing the scale and scope of the market and making it make more money
Okay.
makes the operator more money as well.
Sure, the house wins.
Um, so what I have is a design that switches up the incentives and allows you to drop your as an operator, you get to drop your costs faster than you get to drop your revenues. So while total revenues would be down,
Okay.
profits would actually be higher because it's a much simpler system to administer.
Absolutely. And I think that this is much more equitable. But, if I were to compare to, let's say, the 1980s and that movie Trading Places, I would think today, JP Morgan, from my understanding, they have a supercomputer that skims a penny or something or so, a penny or two pennies or whatever the exact number is. I'm not sure what the exact data is in terms of their high frequency trading. So,
Yes.
yes. So,
Yes.
what are your thoughts about that?
Basically, they aren't providing a valuable market function.
Okay.
They aren't actually producing price information, that critical thing that allows the businesses to coordinate through the marketplace. That's the service that's actually being provided. What they've done is essentially taken advantage of this noise thing I was talking about. And we can see that since the 80s, the fraction of the economy that the financial system takes up has actually been increasing as a share. Uh, that's not a good sign in a service, particularly if the service is providing effectively the same service over that time frame. Um, if it's increasing its share and the service is the same, then you're paying more for the same, or i.e., you're getting less,
Right.
and that's what we're seeing. Uh, with marketplaces that can provide that service at a lower cost to the economy, what that that excess money essentially gets to be reinvested in the productive economy, and that cycle becomes a virtuous cycle that increases the overall size of the economy itself.
Yeah, and it's exponentially positive. So if I'm an investor for a moment, let's say I put on my investor hat, this would be a great idea because of diversification. So if I didn't want to put all of my eggs into cryptocurrency, if I don't want to put all of my eggs into gold or silver, this is something that, let's say that I'm even a member of a family business and the industry that my product or service is in is being challenged at this time or changed in the landscape at this time. And I want to know that my money is going to be just not lost. Like if somebody is playing options, they could, create a put or a call, and then, on the Thursday or the following Friday when it expires 3 weeks out, or I'm obviously talking some investment language there. They could lose their shirt or $3,000 or 30,000 or whatever that number is. So,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. If you see some of the things, this is shading more into stocks than commodities, but they're a little bit more famous these days with the GameStop and the so-called Reddit apes. Um, because these marketplaces are foundationally competitive,
okay.
a large surge of coordinated people can discombobulate the market in severe ways, and that's what bubbles are. And within the market structure that we use right now, there's no way to determine the difference between a bubble or some other illegitimate price maneuver and actually legitimate sentiment change.
Okay.
People could actually decide that GameStop is the only functioning mall company and deserves to have lots and lots of money, and that might be completely legitimate. Time will tell. Um, on the other hand, a handful of influential social media people could post up their book and get thousands of teenagers to do the same thing they do in lockstep, and as a result of that, create a incredibly powerful noise signal that becomes incredibly profitable if you can time it right, which, as the instigators, they can.
Yeah.
uh, that that kind of thing isn't isolated to things in the news. You saw stuff like the flash crash around the time of the global financial crisis, or the global financial crisis itself. Um, these kinds of events aren't rare. Uh,
Yeah, and I want to get into that in a moment, but I have a question first. So is what you're creating, is it an app? Is it a platform? Is it a website similar to like Ameritrade?
it would be effectively a platform.
Okay,
It would be like the thing that Ameritrade currently connects to.
okay.
It's more like the New York Stock Exchange, or this something that CME Group has in Chicago, or the London Metals Exchange. It's that kind of a thing. Um, the users could access it through an app,
Mhm.
um, and because it's simpler, uh, that becomes a more practical thing to do. It's not infrequent to have to go through brokerages, and in fact, sometimes several layers of brokerages if you're too sort of small. In the global space, we have a fairly robust and sort of functioning economy that's well situated. But I've spoken to people from around the world, and it's not unusual in places like India or Brazil, or spots in Central Asia, for there to be half a dozen to a dozen brokers that connect the farmer to whoever it is actually needs to take it off the truck and stick it in their factory. And none of those people work for free. And so there can be many, many layers. And again, that's an exponential kind of relationship. If you're taking a 5% markup, that's a 5% cost of operation. But if 10 people in a row take a 5% markup, that's not a 50% bump in the price. That's a lot more than that.
Yeah. So is it in the theoretical phase right now, or where are you at?
It is primarily theoretical. I'm pursuing the patent right now, and
Yes.
um, I'm looking for opportunities to put it into practice. Uh, some of the concepts are being used as part of proposals for uh, markets that are trying to be launched in Singapore, and other kinds of kind of scaling issues. Um, just trying to find a place to get sort of actual users to trade through this kind of idea.
Well, I think the idea is an amazing idea. And so if I look for a moment to, let's say, we just brought up Singapore, in the 70s, there was the Asian contagion between Vietnam, Thailand, China, Japan. Their housing and commodity market fell. And even with currencies, we kind of have an idea that in the cycles of currencies, a single currency might go 70 years, 100 years.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So
Uh,
I might make the presumption that your app or your platform would flatten the curve of the highs and the lows, at least for the investors that are.
that's extremely likely, because what my system does is actually provides knowledgeable forecasters incentives to do precisely that. Uh, because I I pay the forecasters a percentage of the trades that run through the marketplace. The more value that those trades have, the higher the value of what the forecasts are, if that makes sense. And so a scary marketplace that has unpredictable crashes or booms isn't actually going to produce the same value of trade as a predictable marketplace will.
Hmm.
Predictability in price is the key, because that's what allows individual businesses to do planning. You're talking about South Asia. That's one of the most agriculturally productive regions on Earth. Um, However,
Dot, dot, dot.
they've had historical problems with transportation. So to become the breadbasket of the world, um, it would have to be worth shipping out of that region, and that would require investment in everything from ports and rail to anti-piracy measures, which have all historically been very bad in that area, going back to Magellan, basically. Um, and making investments in an environment where you don't know what the price is going to be tomorrow doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So that pricing knowledge creates that sort of stability around the idea of doing the infrastructure work and being able to exploit these things more effectively.
Yes, yes. And speaking of China for a moment, there's a company called Evergarden, and they are the company that built the cities. You're nodding your head, okay. And
Yes.
now they want to take them down because they're in a financial crunch. But let me, for lack of better vocabulary, the villagers that have invested their money from the countryside into these cities are basically jumping out of windows, and
Well, and coming through them, it's hard to get highly reliable information out of China. But I saw a story a week ago that sort of their version of Occupy Wall Street was taking prisoners. The story was accompanied by a photograph of some guys who were supposedly the investors standing in offices with uh, the suits lying down face down on the ground.
okay,
I don't think there was any bloodshed, but yeah, China has gone through an unprecedented expansion in their economy over the last 40 years at this point.
with
Uh,
cities in Africa and brand new cities throughout
yes, yeah.
China. Yeah.
Uh, the in 1980 there was maybe one or two cities on Earth that had populations of 10 million or more, like Mexico City and maybe another one. And in China there's like 50 or 60 of those now. um, and and the incentives they put in place for sort of getting up through the bureaucracy was, if you make your land worth more money, then you'll get a promotion.
Mhm.
Well, what makes land worth more money than putting a high rise on it? Instead of yeah, being able to put 10 families, you can put 1,000 families because you have an understory building there.
Sure, and the
So
economies of scale, right?
yeah, so they just uh, built the future, regardless of whether or not it was going to show up. Uh, there was a story, this was nearly a decade ago at this point, actually probably more than that, uh, about China building the world's largest mall, and there were there was no occupancy. They'd just gotten finished. It was bigger than the Mall of America, and they were at under 5% occupancy. And the people who had built it said, yeah, we didn't even bother looking to sign up anchor stores or anything like that. We've got an economy that's growing at 8% a year. In a decade, this thing will be full.
Right.
Um, and like I said, it's probably been over a decade at this point. I don't know whether or not it filled up or not, but that kind of bubble thinking,
Right.
um, uh, no tree grows to the sky. There is a ceiling someplace. Maybe China's hit theirs. Maybe this is just a bobble along the way. I'm certainly not an expert on the internal economy of China.
Well, I would think then that your platform would balance out some of those losses.
It certainly would. My concept is highly bubble resistant. The issue with bubbles comes down to when shifts start when the existence of the shift starts taking over the growth. So it's entirely reasonable for something to suddenly be worth twice as much. It's Elon Musk just got a contract from NASA in his space thing, making it radically more valuable. And at the same time, Jeff Bezos's was it Blue Origins? They didn't get the contract, making it radically less valuable. Those kinds of things happen. But if people see the price of something increasing and decide that they're going to start investing in that in order to sort of ride the wave, then their investments will in turn cause the price to increase. And what you get is sort of an unintentional self-reinforcing pyramid scheme. And that's what bubbles are. Uh, and I'm unaware of good studies on sort of how fast assets can appreciate before they'll attract bubble behavior. Um, but certainly, with 40 years of an entire economy expanding at 8% a year, the leading edges of that are going to have a few sort of self-induced bubbles. I mean, the global financial crisis was caused because America's real estate boom switched into bubble behavior at some point between 1960 and 19 or 2007.
Yeah,
And
I also think America was sold an illusion. Maybe the whole world was sold an illusion with that real estate bubble.
yeah, with my system, however, because of the price curve being what is being forecasted about, in order to have a bubble in existence, you would have to forecast an exponential forward curve over decades into the price curve. And since that is if really obviously nonsense,
Hmm.
even in the throes of the frenzy of the 2000s, people were willing to admit that while the existing housing stock was certainly worth what it was currently worth and was obviously going up, that the boomers would retire and or die by say 2040, and obviously prices would start coming down at that point. Obviously we didn't get anywhere near there, but uh, that that tapering at the far end, maybe 25 years down the road, but that's still available as a economical time slot to forecast about within my system, allows you to break the illusion of the exponential growth. And once it's broken, then you can start thinking a lot more sensibly about how to transition that values can go up, but they can't scream off to infinity.
Right, right. So I would think that your platform would mitigate losses. So let me give you a scenario here. So let's say there's an investor and he or she would like to invest 100 million. Maybe they'll lose 10 million, but they could make 5 million, or they could make 100 million. But it seems like maybe worst case scenario, they would lose 10 million. Are those numbers kind of correct in what you might say would be the risk?
um that's not unreasonable. What my scheme really does for a forecaster slash investor is it allows them to limit their exposure to whatever it is that they're actually willing to risk. In the existing system, in order to get any kind of real returns, you have to use leverage to get yourself up to there. And so if you're borrowing at 5 or 10x, then The risk is that on a drop, your position can get wiped out. So if you're borrowing at 10x, you've got $100 million, you're effectively investing $1 billion. But if your position goes down by 10%, then you're wiped out at that point. If the position goes down 1%, you'd lose $10 million. Now, to save yourself from being wiped out, perhaps you have some sort of stoppage in place that would, if it went down 1%, get you out with the 10 million. On the other hand, the flash crash structure means that it could blow through that. The marketplace basically isn't forced to give you uh, uh, the price that you asked for when you ask for it. And if there's a general deluge, then you can lose your shirt, and it can get a lot worse than that. And for the big companies that went out of business, it did. They were operating at way more than 10x leverage, and the market as a whole dropped by way more than 10%, and did it as a step, basically just boom, it's worth a lot less now. And so they went from not just getting wiped out, but actually being in debt and bankrupt,
Right.
um, to those situations. This my system is operating off of a parimutuel concept. And so it's providing the leverage effect as a fundamental concept of the system.
Mm,
Basically, you use your information and your money to buy into a position, and the cost of buying in is based on the value you see in the outcome. So, uh, if it turns out that you're 100% wrong, which is not likely, but certainly possible, um, that position would be wiped out. It would go to zero, but it could never go to a negative number. And and every amount of partial correctness that there is in the position, um, is going to give you something back. Whereas in the existing system, if you go in to get the kind of leverage that's necessary to match the sorts of returns that I'm proposing as an average, um, if you're 8% wrong, then you're going to go to zero.
right.
And if you're 9% wrong, then you're going to go to zero, and you're going to have to cough some stuff up, on the back end. So that sort of thing gives you a massive risk-adjusted rate of return advantage over what the current market offers.
That's great. And I wonder who would be your ideal customer to sign up?
That's where things get tricky with marketplaces. The marketplaces are starting to become popular in e-commerce, but the hard part is that they're a two-sided system. You need buyers and sellers to come to your
Correct.
marketplace. My situation is actually even worse than that. I have a three-sided marketplace,
Okay.
so I need buyers, sellers, and forecasters. Although the
Okay.
buyers and sellers can provide some of that information initially. So my ideal customer is a commodity space, uh, which is currently too small to be able to support the infrastructure of existing markets, um, where there's groups that would be willing to pilot out with 1 to 5% of their production through this style of marketplace. Um, so there are agricultural products that aren't sort of huge. Some of them, like oats, for example, is like a $2 billion global market.
Correct. Correct.
Normally, that would be too small. Uh,
Okay.
but because oats have been traded since, the English exchange in the city of London, they're grandfathered in. But uh, newer uh, newer products aren't. And so some of those, which are in the hundreds of millions to billions, could qualify. Also, other countries, I'm sort of searching worldwide, because there can be local or internal marketplaces that right now have to use American pricing. So, for example, Ukraine produces an awful lot of wheat, but they don't have local marketplaces that are worth anything. So the farmers actually hedge on the Chicago exchanges. But this is quite expensive for them because they have to buy into their hedge. And then after they're done using it, they have to buy back out of their hedge, losing money on
Yeah,
both sides of the trade because they can't deliver, not to Chicago, not
sure.
economically.
I was going to suggest that what is it, the law of necessity? That I think that these days people are looking for alternatives, alternative models and alternative choices, and especially when there's pain. And with the US
Um,
dollar, the inflation's going up, and we don't know. I think right now, at least Americans, you know, with gas prices going up, I just when I look back at the 70s and just the inflation, somebody could buy a pickup truck back in the 70s for a reasonable price, and now it's $30,000 or $40,000 for a decent pickup truck.
Oh yeah, yeah. My dad was a football fan, and I remember car commercials from the early '80s, and the prices that were quoted for cars in those days are stunning by by
Right.
modern standards.
It was possible. It was
Mhm.
possible. And I think a lot of Americans, and I've had a couple of guest speakers on this Legacy Series podcast that talked about Americans then transferring their money and investments and so forth to foreign jurisdictions like Switzerland. And I learned about investing in foreign jurisdictions and foreign trusts and so forth back in 2013, but it was back to necessity again. It was what will protect my future, what will make sense, what is logical, what is practical, or do I do the same thing that everyone else is doing and then get the same results?
Yeah, it's a real issue, and and if I'm right, I mean, I think I am, that the market structure that we have is unstable to the
Unsustainable.
existence. Yeah, well, computers really change the calculation for
Change the
how these things
landscape.
work.
Change
Exactly. Yeah.
changed how we do business, how we communicate, how we talk, how we relate.
So if we can expect markets to perform worse every time computers get faster, and we can certainly expect that based on the experience of the last 4 decades and the underlying mathematics of the market operation, then these kinds of things are going to get worse until people are interested enough to reach out to something that can survive.
Yeah, yeah. I was gonna kind of make a comment that if, and I don't know your market as well as you probably do, because I'm in the coaching and advisory space, but I would think that if you're breaking into a market that's controlled by Goldman Sachs, how will they benefit? What's that smile on your face?
Um, so I would actually be a little leery of claiming that Goldman Sachs had control. The company that truly has control of the commodity space is the CME Group,
Okay.
um, which changed their name. It's comes from Chicago Mercantile Exchange,
Mhm.
um, and they're the global source.
Okay.
The way commodity markets as presently constructed work is that in general a benchmark market occurs, and so there's a wheat trade in France and there's a
Mhm.
wheat trade in Chicago, and if the two of them disagree, France changes because Chicago wheat is the benchmark, and that's what wheat costs on planet Earth.
Mhm.
And if you disagree, it's because you're wrong, and that's just all there is.
Right.
Um, and where the benchmarks are, there's a handful in New York. There's a lot of them in Chicago. There's a lot of it in London. In general, benchmarks basically just to stay benchmarks because it's based on how much trade volume happens there. And because what you're interested in as a user of a marketplace is that price information, trading on a non-benchmark market does happen. There's conveniences to sort of having the local guys down the street for delivery and so on. But if you really care about that price, and if it's your livelihood, you really do, then you got to go talk to the benchmark, and talking to the benchmark through a broker or a broker or something else is still a better deal than trading with, the the boondocks market of outer whatever that's down the street. Um, and with markets structured the way that markets are currently structured, that's effectively just the way it is. A country like China, as big as it is, can't take over the benchmarks without uh, outbidding what's called the implicit order book value. Basically, every time you make a trade request to a marketplace, you're giving them for free an option to accept
Mhm.
your trade request. And the value of those trade requests aren't very high, but there's billions of them. And so the aggregate value of all of them is trillions of dollars. And unless you can outbid that price, you can't provide a market that's going to be as liquid as the benchmark is. Um, and nobody has trillions of dollars to sort of flush down a toilet to
Right.
outbid these guys. So they have software that can execute these trades.
And algorithms. Yes.
Yes, in microseconds.
Correct.
So millions of trades per second. Uh, and that's not fast enough because computers are as fast as computers are.
Mhm.
And the marketplace, in order for markets, the kinds of markets we have, to be able to have the safety features that are necessary for them to work, they have to go faster than the people that are trading on them. And thanks to computers, everyone gets to be the same speed. Um,
Yeah, I like one of the things I like about your concept and idea is that it brings a more humane approach to computers being here. Like somebody could take a fork and use it to, eat their dinner, or they could take a fork and stab their pet. I know that's not the best metaphor, but you know what I mean. It's
Well, so this goes into sort of a concept and philosophy I've been working on for decades now, is that in many cases we have computers. It's very rare that we use computers.
okay.
And a and the products of the Industrial Revolution are all around us. And so we can see these things. Cars don't work like horseless carriages. Um, Tractors don't work like moldboard plows. The Having the kind of energy density and torque that's available from steam engines or internal combustion engines changes how you do transportation, planting, manufacturing, forging. The You can go on YouTube and watch videos of people making, objects out of metal by hand, and it's quite fascinating and satisfying. You can also go on YouTube and watch how factories produce forged metal objects, and they're not similar to each other. The people stick something in fire and then look at it and then hit it with something, or maybe a machine. Um, the factory takes this ingot that's white hot and slams it into a thing that, turns it into spaghetti basically, and then maybe grabs and twists it into the right shape, and then punk, an axle falls out, and then
Right.
that's just it. um, Computers, where they've been adopted, have largely been used to replicate uh, the the organizational structures that were already there. If you, again, sort of going back in time, if you go back to like the 50s or 60s, something like the Sears Tower
Mhm.
existed because in order to operate, Sears needed to have thousands of clerks taking in orders, doing the accounting, checking on inventories, and so on to keep track of everything. Amazon is doing pretty much exactly the same thing, except they have computers that can take that order from you, can do that inventory, and so on. And there definitely are some advantages. We've learned a little bit about logistics between now and then, and Amazon's doing much better logistics than Sears ever did. Um, but in many cases, it really is. It's just exactly the same. The newsletter that you would put together is the same newsletter that your secretary or your PR department would have put together, and it's getting emailed instead of mass mailed, and that's cheaper, and that's
Right.
good.
And
But
thank you,
it's still
Grammarly.
right. Yes, but it's still the same newsletter. It's still being composed more or less the same way.
Right.
And so those sorts of structural changes, where you identify what it is that's important about what you're doing and what computers are good at, that makes it possible to do that thing. Um, and
Is making our intentions more efficient? Is that how you might say it?
that's that's a good way of thinking of it. I I think of it sort of more in terms of e- exploiting capabilities.
Okay.
So, like with engines can produce a lot more force than human muscle can. So, if there's some way to solve a problem that's very effective but requires more force than human muscle can put forth, use the more effective solution. So, humans have to row boats with oars, but that spiral screw design moves water more efficiently than oars do, um, but not with human levels of power behind it. um, so you're taking advantage of the greater power. Computers are very good at replicating behavior, keeping track of things, instantaneous recall, wide area communication, and so on. So if there's a way to solve a problem that involves doing an enormous amount of bookkeeping, so much so that humans doing it would never be practical, then you can transfer that problem to a computer and just have it solve the problem through bookkeeping.
Yeah.
Um,
Yes. So the greatest benefit then to a user or to an investor would be the mitigation of losses, or would it be that this platform rewards honesty? What say you?
I think ultimately it's the rewarding of honesty.
Okay,
Um,
because I know these days everything is more transparent and people care about ESG, which is that environmental social governance acronym.
yeah. Um, uh, I think sort of the world produces enough confusion and complexity, all by itself. It's sort of hard enough to solve the problem of how to cope with what reality actually is without having to pile on the problem of whether or not you can trust the guy standing next to you to be telling you the truth. And so uh, markets have existed for centuries because they are the most trustable institutions in our societies. Um, and we've seen not just recently erosions of that trust, but we've also seen in the 20th century very dramatically what happens to societies that forcibly remove that trust mechanism. Um, the communist dictatorships and the horrifying uh, human rights and economic collapses that those areas experienced
Okay.
as a result of not having trustable information, um, was devastating.
And I also think with the increased transparency today, people want more choices. Like even with, you just spoke about human rights. I know with the luxury industry and data rights, people are much more informed if there is some company that's scraping their data, monetizing it, and then the client of that brand including Google and social media brands, is unhappy. Why are you getting all the benefit and I'm not getting any of that monetization off of the data scrubbing?
Yeah, that's a major issue. And
But
and
consumers are so much more informed today. Sorry, go ahead.
well, that's true. But at the same time, uh, the new generations are so much less interested in personal privacy and sort of so much more comfortable with n- losing that autonomy. And and so yeah, there's a lot of room uh, in current systems to kind of exploit the advantages that computers offer us.
Yeah.
Um, and and building systems that can allow taking some of that back, I think, is going to be key, because
Timely, timely.
we have computer technology. It's not going to go anywhere,
Hmm.
uh, and and it does undermine the systems that we have. And so we can't we're not going to get rid of computers, and we can't live without economic, social, cultural, and political structure. So we have to
Yeah.
develop structures that aren't going to kill us. And right now, we're not very good at that.
Yeah. 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 Well, I see it. And you're right. I think that people want alternatives. And if the existing model may have worked 100 years ago or 200 years ago or whenever, there needs to be an update. So I appreciate that you're bringing this platform and this idea to the marketplace, even just for the conversation today, because it opens up a space of even just people realizing with their imagination that there is more choice. It's not just right. So
Well, yes, yeah.
this leads me perfectly to the next question about the three values that you get to honor, because I think there's a bit of integrity here. And then I will close up at the top of the hour with, the legacy you would like to create and leave behind. But you must be values driven, because some people wouldn't care. They wouldn't care if the little guy gets screwed. Pardon my French.
Um, well, uh, so yeah, my kind of primary big driver is learning. Uh,
Education.
um, Not necessarily education.
Okay.
I'm a lot of an autodidact. I've had great educational opportunities, although when I tell people about them, what I've discovered is that most people haven't had great educational opportunities, and so I think learning has to be sort of a bigger part than that, and it needs to be a part of a normal life to learn about the state of the art of something, and at least try to explore beyond that. And so that's where my recreational mathematician stuff comes from, and that's how this journey started.
Okay.
um,
So you want humans to transform and be able to grow compared to being stifled or traumatized.
yes, there's a historian, connections, James Burke. If you ever seen his work, The Day the Universe Changed, he was a filmmaker and historian, released some very good things on BBC. I think they're actually like online for free these days, in the 70s, 80s, maybe even the 90s. um, and his premise was that the Industrial Revolution was not only rooted in thousands of more years of history of human technological development, but was also sort of foundationally a result of a bunch of people. It's not just Thomas Edison banging out the light bulb in the washing machine. The infrastructure of better steel, and cheaper wiring, and on and on and on, that allowed whoever it was that kind of put the last two snaps together to have two snaps put together, um, was the result of thousands of people that just got interested in pond scum, or toenail clippers or whatever, and just figuring out something about manufacturing or the world or whatever it was. Um, and and was it the Phantom Toll Booth? There's a thing about anybody learning anything makes all of us better off, and
Yes.
so that kind of just uh, uh, learning for fun, learning that's very central. And I happen to kick this particular rock over, um, and once I'd done that, uh, I analyzed the thing that resulted, and um, there are some personal values about sort of my interests in truth and functional integrity and so on, that went into that kind of design. But once I got done with that and then started researching the history to see whether or not somebody had already thought this up. Normally when I come up with something new and interesting, it isn't new at all. Um, Once I realized that this cost less than the systems that we have now, and the consequences of it costing less would be massive economic expansion across wide varieties of the economy simultaneously. That's when this really kicked over from sort of my hobby and isn't this an interesting thing to think about, for a couple hours a day, to really a purpose. I mean, um, we were talking about China's enormous economic growth. One of the most impressive things about that is that they lifted basically 1 billion people out of absolute poverty in the last half of the 20th century, which is, in one sense, one of the biggest human rights successes in existence. Um, Economic growth is more directly connected to human well-being than sort of any other single factor, and being able to lower the transaction costs goes direct to the bottom line of that well-being. And being able to lower
And
transaction costs this
and I'm,
much,
yeah, and I might call that fairness in terms of a symmetrical business model or a symmetrical relationship.
that I'm happy with that word. Yeah.
Okay, okay. And I have to wrap up in a couple of minutes.
Sure.
What would you like your legacy to be? And I know that this is, you spoke about purpose a moment ago. I think for anyone who even gives voice to what their legacy would be, it's a commitment that they want their life to matter, that they're not just going to be hiding behind their fears, or that they're going to be a follower, but rather they're willing to think for themselves and put their stake in the ground. So what is the legacy you would like to create, because you've already got so many of the fundamental pieces of your foundation in place?
Well, going back to some of the stuff we've been talking about, I think computers are a bigger deal than steam engines were. And steam engines basically wiped out the entire cultural, political, social order of Europe, which developed them, and then the world as they got to there, because doing things the old way didn't make any sense anymore once you had tractors and railroads and all the rest of that stuff. So I believe that computers, being a bigger deal than steam engines, are going to do the same thing. I think our social, cultural, religious, economic orders are in their final days, and that we need better ones. And I would like my legacy to be contributing to building something that can actually work and support a future that has the technology and understanding that we have. Um, because the biggest thing about computers isn't that they play chess better than we do, or that they can trade on the market in a millionth of a second. The biggest thing about computers is actually the philosophical breakthrough that these are machines that are that are literally magic. They become whatever you tell them to become.
Right.
So we have access to Tolkien-esque magic. If you know how to tell this machine how to be something, that's
Mhm.
what that machine is.
And we'd like to have Gandalf the Grey behind the machine compared to the
Well,
other fellow Saruman or whatever his name
well,
was.
yes, yes. Well, we don't really have wizards. We just have people, and
Right,
and
right.
so we're gonna have to learn like spells that aren't horrifying.
Or
uh,
traumatizing every time
or
there's a
yes.
war, how many wars there's, been War One,
Well,
Two, Vietnam,
l-
etc., Afghanistan, Middle East, Iraq.
well, even far more mundane. I mean, there's studies linking social media use to teen suicide and
Yeah, I'm
depression
aware of that.
rates.
And the pandemic has caused much young adult suicide recently. So I think it's a wonderful legacy then, because you're applying your talents to a better model that is available in this future. So if people don't like option A, at least you're giving them option B, compared to like if somebody walks into, again, this is not the best example, it's just the only one that comes to mind. If they walk into a fast food franchise like McDonald's or Taco Bell and there's only one menu, at least now they can say, well, if I don't like the menu, now I don't have to complain. There are some alternatives in terms of this innovation that you're bringing forward.
Yes, I hope so.
Okay. Any other final thoughts, or what is the best way to reach you for any of the listeners?
Yeah, sure. I can be reached through my website. It's at coordisc.com. That's COORDISC, for coordinated discovery. It's sort of a contraction there. Um, or you can reach me at my email address, Noah P. Healy, NOAHPHEALY at Yahoo. Or you reach out to me on LinkedIn. I'm Noah Healy. Most Noah Healys on the internet are me. There is another Noah Healy that Google reports, but he's a lot younger than I am, and I was around for the September that never ended. So I locked up a lot of the Noah Healys back then.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, thank you, Noah, so much for being one of the guest speakers on this legacy series. I definitely wanted people who were what I call positive role models that can set an example for others, whether it's the young adults, the Generation Zs, or someone of any age, to see that there are always possibilities that are available in this world. We don't have to stay stuck inside of a box. And I think you've really brought forward your values of learning and integrity, what I might call service to others, as well as just being driven by purpose. I know the markets are generally driven by kind of a back and forth regarding greed and fear. But I think that if you kind of pull it back to the 5,000-foot eagle's view, you're really being driven by purpose in looking at the design itself and asking, with all of the different players and participants, how can we do this better?
Uh, yeah, yeah, and that I think that's the challenge that's in front of us, with these new capabilities. Computers, the internet, um, blockchain is coming up. Uh, New technologies in AI. People are now learning things about chess and Go that we never knew before, and that's getting expanded. I think poker is starting to become dominated by AI. I just saw something recently. I think diplomacy had an AI bot do rather well. That I don't know if you're familiar with that bookcase game, but it's Avalon Hill had a sort of World War One simulator game that's highly abstract called Diplomacy. That's has a very small adherent group. It's famous. I think the 2012 World Championship game lasted for 3.5 years. Uh, it's an extremely human centric negotiation and backstabbing game, and there are apparently bots on Facebook now that just crush humans on a regular basis.
Very interesting. Very nice. All right. Well, thank you so much for sharing your idea about this platform with the listeners and introducing them to um, this concept and this alternative. I mean, I can also consider it a best practice because it's thinking beyond just where we are today, and we definitely need that innovative thinking. So, thank you so much, Noah. And for anyone who's listening, please like, subscribe, and share with your friends and family. Um, and for Noah, as well as any listener, please keep defining, developing, and executing your legacy because we need more positive role models in this world.
Yep. Thank you.